Hey everyone, Sean here from Crafted Elements. We are the leading providers of large format silicone molds, and in 2021 we released our line of router templates, which we have a massive collection of. We've got charcuterie boards, handles, pieces for functional art. And as we sell more of these templates, I'm getting a lot of questions regarding their proper use. I'm getting a lot of questions specifically about router kickback. So I wanted to make this short video to look at the tips and tricks and best practices on using these templates. I'm going to go ahead and grab one of our free flow handle templates. I've got a piece of maple, roughly an inch thick. I'm going to put that handle on this board, and while I do that, I'm going to explain everything you should be considering when doing this to get the best finish with the least amount of work and lowest amount of risk of damage or kickback. Let's get started. All right, so I've taken the protective paper off our template. That's the first thing you want to do once you get a brand new template. And most of these handle templates have a center marker, which is the longest line. Mark the center of your board and line it up as follows. And then we're just going to trace it out. Very, very simple. Hold it down and trace everything, including the center hole, if you want to actually proceed with cutting that part out as well. All right, so you got that, trace. Very, very simple, right? Now when we're cutting this, I've mentioned this in other videos, but if you may have missed that, you do not want to cut right on this line. You want to cut anywhere from 1/8 to 1/4 outside this line, so out here. And the reason we're doing that is because we're essentially rough cutting the shape, and then we're going to reattach this with glue or 2A tape or carpenter's tape, whatever you want to use. And then we're going to let the router and the router bit do the actual shaping. So what we're going to do now is we're going to rough cut this. The key is get as close as possible. Don't get on the line, because you may or may not end up going over it, and then your template's kind of useless when it comes to your router bearing. But get as close to the line as you can, as you reasonably can, because the less amount of material that's left, the easier it's going to be to router out. The easier it's going to be for your router bit, the less chance of kickback. If you go and cut over here, 3/8 or something, you've got a lot of meat to take off with that router bit, and that's going to result in a potential kickback situation or just generally more work than you need to. So get it as close to the line as possible without touching the line. Jigsaw, bandsaw, scroll saw, whatever saw you want to use. I'm just going to use a jigsaw for this. I'm going to drill into here, and then we're going to come back and reattach that template. So we've got that cut out. You can see that we have, again, 1/8 to at most 1/4. We've got roughly 1/8 all around. You can still see the lines. We haven't gone onto the lines. That's the key. Now we're going to reattach our template. So attaching these templates is really a personal preference. Some people will use the masking tape or painter's tape and CA glue method, which is essentially you put tape on here, you put tape on here, you put some CA or super glue between it, maybe an activator if you've got one, and then you let it bond that way. The advantage to that method is that you get a really tight fit. The template, the gap between the template and the wood is very, very small, whereas something like two-sided tape like these guys will also work to hold the thing in, but you do have a thicker, obviously, amount of, a thicker distance here when you introduce that two-sided tape, but they all work. My personal preference is, to be honest, go with the lazy method. I use hot glue. You'll see me doing that in multiple template videos. I just find it really easy. It comes off easy. It's not permanent. I like it. You just have to use enough of it. Don't do a couple of dabs and expect it to stick, because the last thing you want is the template flying off when you are obviously routering it. So I'm going to go ahead and heat this up. I'm going to put a bunch of dabs on. I'm going to line this back up to where I put my, where I drew my lines earlier, and then we're going to take it over to the router table and router that out. Okay, so we've attached our template with the hot glue. It's on there pretty good. The next thing I want to talk about is your router and your router bits. Almost every template we sell that isn't an inlay template, i.e. it's creating a shape, charcuterie board, handle, wine caddy, whatever clock. When you're doing the exterior shape, you're really just using one type of bit. It is called a flush trim bit. So I've got a few flush trim bits here. I want to explain the differences because they are generally the same thing. But you know, for example, these guys, you can get 3 or 4 of them in a pack from Amazon for like $20 or $30. They work, but they're not ideal. They're obviously imported. The quality is not that great. You can see I've used this one quite well, and it's kind of burnt up at this point, but I keep it to do demonstrations like this. The higher end bit, and the one that I would definitely recommend, the one we recommend on our website, is from a Mana tool. It's this guy. It is a 1/4 inch bit. It's got a 1/4 inch bearing on it. I believe, I'm just gonna look at the number here. I think it's 46297 is what it says on it. So it's a 46297 1/4 inch flush trim bit, and obviously it has that bearing that's gonna ride against your router template. So using something like this from a Mana tool, this is like an $80 bit. It's not cheap, and you might say, oh, an $80 bit, is it really that much better than a set of $20 bits? To be honest, it is. It's sharper, it's a 1/4 inch, and I've never had kickback on this bit, where I have had kickback on some of these guys. Now, one of the reasons you'll get kickback on these guys is because they're bigger. Like this is, I think, a 3/8 bit, maybe 1/2 inch. So when you're dealing with a thicker flush trim bit, you have more contact, or rather more surface area, right? You've got more surface area, you're gonna get more grabbing and more risk for kickback. So when making a choice for the router bit, I would definitely recommend a smaller diameter like this guy, a 1/4 inch bit. I definitely recommend this particular Mana bit over some of the Amazon ones, but I've definitely had kickback situations on particularly the higher diameter bits because of that surface area function. So now moving on to the router. This is literally, I want to say no name brand, but it's Mastercraft, which is like Canadian Tire here in Canada. It's not a very fancy router. It is literally a fixed base, $160 router. And it's a fixed speed as well. It's 25,000 RPM. That's one of the other key things here, is that you want to run these at a higher RPM, especially if you've got an adjustable router. Running them too slow, it's going to have a greater chance of catching that wood going around when you're routing. So I can't even change the speed of this thing. That 25,000 RPM seems to be sufficient for getting through, you know, a 1/4 inch, an 1/8 of an inch of wood with that router bit fairly quickly. So you don't need anything crazy fancy. And that's actually one of the things I kind of focus on here in the shop. Other than, you know, our CNC machines and laser cutters and stuff like that, everything we have here is like higher end to mid-grade Home Depot range. I don't have any crazy professional tools because the market we serve, like yourself, most of the time is a hobbyist market, small businesses. They're not industrial shops with big money to spend on big crazy tools. So I try to focus on accessible tools like this $160 router. Because it is sufficient enough to do the job you're gonna need. You do not need something insane, you know, $1,000, 3.5 horsepower router to get this job done. Something like this will do it. Just make sure you've got the right bit. So we're gonna go ahead and install the Mana tool router bit into the router. So the next thing you want to do is obviously line up the bearing of your router bit with the template. The entire purpose of this template and flush trim router bit is to use this bearing to glide across the template, and then the blade component of the router bit is what takes the rest of the wood off. So you do not want to have that bearing riding on your wood, nor do you want to have the bearing riding over or under your template. You want to have that on the template. It doesn't have to be exact, but as long as it's sufficiently on that template, so your blade is going to take off the wood component of this setup. Now, the next thing you need to think about is the direction of your router. This case spins this way. You want to push against the direction of the rotation. So you'll notice if I went like this, it's going to have a tendency to pull, which you don't want to do. You want to go against the direction of the rotation. So in this case, I'm going like this. I'm going to bring the camera a little bit closer. So the other tip that I can recommend is start somewhere where you have the least amount of wood, providing it makes sense to do so. So we have a small distance between the actual surface of the wood here and then the template, whereas we've got more there. So I'd probably start here and work my way this way, because what you'll find is if you start with a big thick piece of wood, you might get that initial kickback. But the other thing to mention is that you do want to be firm with these, right? Don't do it loosely. You do want to obviously make this safe. So if you need a push block, that's fine. Wear your goggles, wear a mask if you need to, but you want to make sure you've got a firm grip on your piece and possibly your piece in the template to keep it in place. I'm going to go ahead and turn this router on. Let it spool up. Don't just go at it right away. You want to get it to speed first, because when they rate these routers, they're talking about a no load speed. So this 25,000 RPM is 25,000 RPM without anything touching it, without any load on it. It's going to be reduced from that point. So I'm going to go ahead, turn this on, and watch how I do this. Going against the rotation of the router bit, and again, picking the smallest part to start with, and then going around from there. And then we're going to come back here and do that as well. Now I skipped over kind of a couple of sections when I move this around, because it is okay to do this again. This isn't necessarily a one-shot done deal. I've got kind of a little piece here that we kind of skipped over. I'm going to turn this on again and do a quick run again. Not necessary if you've done it properly the first time, but I'm just saying, don't get hung up on being a perfectionist. You should really get hung up on making sure that your template doesn't come off the wood and that you're getting a good shape, not for speed here, right? All right, next thing you want to do is take your template off the wood. I just use a metal spatula and get under my hot glue and just pry it up. Depending on the method you used, it's going to be a little bit harder. If you use, for example, the CA glue and masking tape method, that has a better bond than this hot glue does. But that's why I like the hot glue. It really comes off easy, and then you can just go and kind of do this and get rid of all the excess. Remember that you're going to end up sanding or planing or whatever this anyway, so get a little bit of residue left over. It doesn't really matter. So to finish off the shaping of this board before I go to sanding, I've just grabbed my 1/4 inch round over bit. It's live edge, so really you may or may not use this, but I'm just going to go ahead and do both sides and then the straight side here, because only one side of this is live edge, and that will give a nice rounded profile on the back and front. Okay, one more time, quicker this time, just the point form version. And I'm going to use one of our full-size charcuterie board templates and this spare piece of walnut. It's not a perfect piece. The board is actually going to be a little bit bigger than the raw wood allows. So we're going to have kind of a partial live edge on this thing, but that's fine. The whole point is to demonstrate how to use these templates and how to cut properly. So again, tracing everything here with my pencil, taking it over to the saw, staying 1/8 to 1/4 outside this line. Come back in a sec. Lining up our bearing to make sure that it and only it rides across the template. Turn it on, wait for it to spool out. We're gonna start here where it has a small amount of wood. Gently pry this off. Rid of your residue. And as I said earlier, this particular piece of wood was actually a little bit small, so we ended up with some bark and live edge. We can just take that off actually. Perfect. We'll go around the edges. Okay, well that is 2 projects done. We've got our little charcuterie board, our flared paddle, I believe this is called, and then we've got our free flow handle that we did on this piece. Really easy to do, as you've probably seen. Again, takes some work just like anything else, but let's review the core things here. First thing you're gonna do is trace out your template onto your wood. You're then going to take that over to your saw, keep it an 1/8 or 1/4 inch at most away from that perimeter. You're letting the router template do the work once you come back to your router. Bring it back to your router, which is going to be set to a higher speed. A lower speed is not going to be ideal. You want a higher speed. Again, the router I'm using here runs at 25,000 RPM without any load. It may be different for you depending on the table setup and your router, and of course the blade, or rather the router bit that you're using. And while we're on that topic, of course, using a lower diameter, like a 1/4 inch diameter total router bit, is going to be better than using something thick. Lower contact area, lower surface area is going to help prevent that router kickback. When you approach your router, you're going to try and get the part to start with the least amount of meat on the bones. So the part of your piece that has the least amount of wood on it, start there and go around. Keep a firm grip on your piece, including the router template if you can, and just gently go around. It is not a race. If you miss something, do it again. You can go over as many times as you want. It doesn't have to be perfect the first time. That's a great thing. As long as your router template is still in the same position, you can keep going around and perfect it if you've missed anything in the past. Once you've done that, bring it over to your table. Gently pry off that router template. Don't just grab one and pull it because you may end up snapping it. Gently pry off the template. And then continue finishing from there, whether you want to round it out, use a round over bit, or some sort of other funky routering bit, or just sand it with your hand sander, whatever you want to do. The router template's job is done. I hope you found this video helpful and useful to get you started on your journey to routering and shaping with our templates. And again, you can shop our templates, which is like, I don't know, like 150 of them at this point or something, at craftedelements.com. Thank you for watching. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. And if you haven't already subscribed, make sure you do that now. Thanks, guys.